friends, real quick. We're on a mission to hit 25,000 subscribers by Halloween, and every single sub, like, and comment helps push The Darkest Hour out to a wider audience. So if you enjoy spooky stories and want to help this haunted little corner of YouTube grow, hit that subscribe button because it truly makes a difference. Thank you. Now, on with the show. Hello everyone, and welcome to The Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. The ocean has always held secrets, some beautiful, some ancient, and some that were never meant to surface. Tonight, we head into the open water, where isolation runs deep. The horizon offers no promise of safety, and the strangest horrors aren't always the ones you can see. Out here, it's easy to lose your way, easy to hear something that no one else can, and easier still to vanish without a trace. So, let's get started, shall we? When I was growing up, my mom would take me and my sister sailing on most weekends. The tradition started a few months after my dad died. I guess it was her way of trying to take our mind off of things, and the habit just kind of stuck. Sometimes we would spend a night out at sea. We all loved to watch the sunset and rise over the open water. For really nice nights, we would make our beds on the deck and watch the shooting stars while we fell asleep. On one of those nights, we all woke up to a high-pitched whirring noise and a big, swirling, flashing light shooting out of the sky. It came down so fast. 1 second it was in the sky, and then it was crashing into the ocean, maybe 100 yards from us. It hit so hard that the waves nearly knocked our boat over, and we got soaked by the overflow. When we looked over at where the lights went down, there was an object, almost as big as our boat, floating in the ocean. It was glowing, but with a softer light than what had shot across the sky. I don't know what to call its shape. It had at least 4 sides just from what we could see, so maybe octagonal once you included the other side. It rose into 4 tall peaks, and each one had dark window-like panes circling around the top. My sister and I were more fascinated than afraid. I was only 11, she was 9, so we didn't really understand what was happening, or what could have happened. But our mom was terrified, even though she didn't show it. Over the years, she only spoke of this incident a handful of times, but when she did, she described it as the worst night of her life. Her first instinct was to get us the hell out of there, but she was afraid of drawing attention to us. Ultimately, she couldn't be sure if she decided it was best to stay still, or if she was just frozen with fear. Then one of the spires opened up, and 3 blinding white spherical shapes emerged and started circling what I'm just going to call the UFO, because what the hell else do you call this thing? They would stop at certain points like they were interacting with it, likely making repairs from what we could see or theorize. After a few minutes of this, they went back inside. I'm not sure if they didn't notice us or didn't care that we were there, but as soon as the top closed, the UFO lit up super bright again, like when it was in the sky, and it shot straight up. It was so fast, it looked like a shooting star as it disappeared back among the stars and out of sight. My sister and I thought that we saw a magic show. We were so excited, we didn't understand why our mom stayed up the rest of the night, or why she made us leave at the crack of dawn. We do now, obviously. We still went sailing a lot after that, but we never went out quite that far again. I've never told this story before because I don't have the actual footage anymore. And you know what they say, no pics, didn't happen. But I'm honestly tired of just keeping it to myself, and I don't mind too much if strangers on the internet call me crazy, so here goes. I turned 17 last summer, and my parents took me and my cousins to California. We went to a bunch of places, but one of the things we did was deep-sea fishing. I'm not much of a fisherman myself. That part was my dad and cousin, but I was excited to go because one of my presents was an underwater drone, and I couldn't wait to try it out. I wanted to get some cool shots of the fish getting caught, but it turns out the fish didn't want to bite while the drone was moving around, so I had to film from the other side of the boat. Also, my drone had a 15-meter range, which is just short of 50 feet. I had to be careful not to go deeper than that. It's noteworthy that my dad and cousin started fishing below 100 feet, when I couldn't film anyway. But they still blamed me when they couldn't catch anything. That was fine. No one was pooping on my party except for me. I recorded a lot of beautiful fish and took the drone to its absolute limit in every direction. It's really hard to describe what happened, so bear with me while I try to paint the scene. My drone had a good light on it, so I could see pretty well. But beyond the light, it was just kind of dark abyss, especially when looking down. Eventually, I saw two glowing lights right below me, but they were deeper than the drone could go. I'm as far from a marine life expert as you can get. My interests lay more in filming and editing, and this was just a new way to do that. I probably know less about the ocean than most of you listening to this, but I did know that some fish have glowing eyes, and I know about those fish with the little dangling lights on their heads. These two lights were pretty far apart, so they couldn't have been eyes. I thought I must be seeing two of those cool dangling flashlight fish. I wanted to get a shot of them so badly. It would have been the coolest part of my movie. I pushed the drone to its limits trying to get a glimpse, but they were just too deep to make out any of their features. They weren't moving, so I didn't either. I hoped they would just come closer to my light or just move closer to each other if the drone was stationary for a few minutes. Eventually, that seemed to work. The lights did seem to get closer, even though I couldn't see any actual movement happening. I started to wonder if I was imagining it, because it seemed weird that they would move that slow and in sync with each other. But hey, maybe that's how these kinds of fish worked, for all I knew. After a few more minutes, I could tell that they were definitely getting closer. The lights were bigger, brighter, and I could almost see the shapes behind them. Only it looked wrong. Instead of two separate shapes, it was one giant shape. I thought maybe they were bigger than I realized and coming up side by side, but that wasn't right either. The overall mass extended too far in each direction. Finally, they were close enough to be sure that those weren't the cool flashlight fish. They were eyes, after all. Two small eyes on a massive body that stretched too far to see the end of. I looked away for half a second to call my mom over. When I looked back, the glowing eyes were surging towards my drone. I had enough time to see a giant mouth filled with rows of needle teeth devouring my drone, and then the screen cut out. I tried to explain what happened, but my mom thought that I went too deep and it sunk out of range. She was pissed. So was my dad. But I was too freaked out to care. In the middle of our argument, something hit the bottom of the boat, hard enough to violently rock it. It wasn't a small boat either. This thing was a pretty good size. The captain didn't have a clue what could have caused it, but he seemed just as scared as I was and said that we had to leave early. I stayed in the middle of the boat with my parents, but my cousin ran to look over the side. The boat got hit a second time just as we started moving, and he almost went overboard, but managed to hang on. He swears he saw a dinosaur-sized tail sinking back below the surface as we sailed away. My parents were more afraid than angry, right up until we made it back to the dock. Then they decided it was probably just a whale and that I was careless with my drone. I tried to pull up the footage on the app to show them that it couldn't have been a whale, but the video wouldn't play. It was corrupted data. I don't understand how that's even possible. Whales don't have glowing eyes or multiple rows of needle teeth, but even if they did, why would that affect my recording? Why would anything affect the recording? My cousin said that the tail he saw was pointed at the end, not finned like a whale's, but they thought that he was trying to cover for me. I've never seen him so freaked out, though. I knew he wasn't lying. He still swears to exactly what he saw, and I know what I saw. The ocean is no place to fuck around and find out. About a decade ago, I took a short-term job offshore on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. I just finished a rough divorce and needed the money bad. I wasn't trained in drilling or anything. My role was mostly support, helping with cleanup, monitoring sensors, filling in whenever an extra set of hands was needed. The pay was good for 3 weeks of isolation and long shifts, and I figured I could handle anything for that long. The rig was called Nadir 6, sitting about 200 miles off the coast of Louisiana. It was older, built in the late 80s, but still in active rotation thanks to a patch of deep-sea reserves that they hadn't fully tapped. The guys there were mostly decent, some rough personalities, some loners, a couple of sarcastic lifers, but nothing too bad. But even from day one, Nadir 6 felt off. It started with the lights. At night from the platform you could see strange flickers below the surface, far too bright for fish, too slow and oddly rhythmic for anything mechanical. They weren't always in the same place. Sometimes they'd hover out near the edge of the visible water. Other times they'd be directly beneath the rig, pulsing, blue, green, and cold, like a heartbeat of light through murky glass. I asked about it the first night. One of the veteran guys, Roddy, he just muttered, "deep bioluminescence," and told me to ignore it. But then I caught 2 others talking in hushed tones about the same thing in the galley the next morning. One said the lights used to move. The other said that he saw them stop once, just stop, dead still. When he stared at it for too long, they just moved, like they were alive. But they always seemed to show up before something went wrong, is what one guy said. 3 days in, we did lose power to the lower pump station. The whole place shuddered, groaned. It was kind of creepy. Well, really creepy. One of the backup generators kicked on, but even then the hydraulics stayed out of sync. No explanation, just a blown fuse or an operator error, according to the report. 2 guys were reassigned to land shortly after. Didn't even say goodbye, just packed and left. A few nights later, a diver went missing. We were doing some inspection work on one of the main supports below the waterline. I wasn't on the dive team, but I helped monitor the audio and cam feeds. Everything looked fine until it didn't. 1 second, he's adjusting a valve. The next, there's a burst of static, and the screen goes black. Then you hear his muffled screams through the regulator. We all rush to the control station. His voice, even though muffled, was in full panic. He kept trying to shout about lights in the dark, something moving between them. And then a noise, low, vibrating, not from his mic, like something scraping metal from the outside. His voice cut out and there was no bubbles or debris, no body, just silence. We pulled up the second diver and he refused to speak, refused to even look at anyone in the eye. When he got to the surface, he ripped off his gear and sat shaking in the corner for hours. Management sent him home the next day on a private chopper. I never learned his name. We were told it was an equipment malfunction. No dive team was sent out again during my rotation, but those odd lights stayed. They changed, too. Not just pulsing anymore. They began circling, spinning around the rig slow like a lazy orbit. It made the shadows move weird across the walls at night, especially the bunk halls. Like there were people walking past your door when there weren't. A guy named Sal swore that he saw one of those lights in his room, said it flickered just once, right above his head, and then vanished. He didn't sleep after that. Not once. They had to sedate him after he tried to climb the communications tower to get away from the glow. And just like so many others, he was gone by morning. I couldn't help but watch the lights every night, and I noticed something. They weren't just moving. They were forming shapes, geometric shapes, triangles, spirals, even writing. At least it looked like writing. Of course, I don't know what it said. Symbols I couldn't read, glowing and fading beneath the waves like phosphorescent calligraphy. I tried showing it to Roddy, but he refused to look with me. Said some things are better left alone. That night I woke up to silence, not calm ocean silence, the kind where everything stops. No creaks, no machinery, just stillness. Then the rig started humming. The sound came from below, vibrating through the floor like something massive had attached itself to the underside of the platform. Looking out, the lights beneath us flared, forming a perfect ring, and something rose. I didn't see all of it. No one did. Just a glimpse. But it was enough. A wall of gray, featureless flesh. The slit of an eye the size of a manhole cover. Rows of bioluminescent points crawling across the thing like veins. It wasn't a creature. Not the way that we understand creatures. It was a presence. A depth-given form. Something old and buried that had simply been waiting. We didn't even make it through the full 3 weeks. The rest of the crew, what was left of everyone, was evacuated the next morning under the guise of a mechanical failure. When we made it back, our gear was confiscated. Phones, journals. They made me confirm the video on my phone was the only copy I had, which it was. And they deleted it. They demolished the Nadir 6 that winter, said it was structurally unsound. I still have no idea if the ship was the problem, or something at sea. Maybe both. The two seemed to work in tandem together, and the more senior crew members, like Roddy, seemed all too familiar with what we encountered that trip. I wasn't supposed to be alone that night. It was a simple overnight trip. Just a short sail, drop anchor, crack a few beers with my cousin Evan, and be back in the morning. He bailed last minute, said his kid had a fever. I should have rescheduled, but I'd already prepped the boat and the forecast was clear, so I went. Just me, a borrowed sailboat, and the open water off the Florida Keys. It was calm at first. I anchored a few miles out, watched the sunset, made myself a drink, even dozed off under the stars. But sometime after midnight, the wind kicked up hard. I jolted awake to the sail flapping violently and the waves slamming against the hull. The sky had gone black. No stars, no horizon, just chaos. I tried to pull the anchor and power back, but I was too late. One rogue wave hit broadside and flipped the boat. I surfaced, disoriented and gasping. The boat was upside down. I managed to climb onto the hull, soaked and shaking, with nothing but the emergency light clipped to my vest. No radio, no flare gun. My phone was somewhere at the bottom of the ocean. So I waited. The hours passed slowly. The wind died, but the water didn't calm. Every little splash made my heart jump. I shouted at passing shadows that turned out to be nothing. At one point, I saw lights, distant and bouncing, like a boat's mast, but they faded. No one came. Then came the voice. At first I thought I was imagining it. Delirium, maybe. But it was clear and close. "Hey, over here." A woman's voice. Young, crisp. I turned in every direction. Nothing but waves and sky. And then again. "Help me, please." It was so close it sounded like it was coming from the water itself. "Where are you?" I yelled. No answer. "Hello?" Silence. And then splash. A few feet off the starboard side, something broke the surface. Just a ripple. I leaned forward, squinting into the dark. "Help me." The same voice. Behind me now. I spun around, but the water was empty. It just kept happening. Every few minutes the voice called again, always from a new direction. Always panicked. Always too close. But the worst part was, I recognized it. It wasn't until the third or fourth time that it clicked. It was my sister's voice. But that was impossible. She was thousands of miles inland. "Over here, Danny." She used my name next. I almost swam away from the boat. I don't know what stopped me. Maybe the rhythm of everything. Every call sounded exactly the same. Same inflection, same timing. Like a recording on a loop. Like it didn't understand how real people would speak. But it knew enough to sound like my sister. Around dawn, a Coast Guard chopper finally spotted me. And I wept the whole way into the basket. The guy strapped to me asked if I was injured. I just kept saying, "Did you hear her? Did you hear the voice?" They just said no, just wind and water. They never found anyone else in the area. No other boats were reported missing. No swimmers, no divers, nothing. They chalked it up to trauma or shock. But a voice. I'm fine now, mostly. I don't go out into the water anymore. Not even really ferry rides. I moved away from the coast and found a job inland. But of course, I'll never really be able to let go of the weirdness of the story. Even if it was my mind playing tricks on me, it really creeps me out. My great-uncle swore he saw Viking longships in the North Sea during a storm. He never backed down from his story. It might sound a little far-fetched, but it's a story I grew up hearing from someone I trusted more than almost anyone else. My great-uncle, my granddad's older brother, spent most of his life in the Navy. He was one of those old-school sailors, hard jawline, rolled sleeves, voice like gravel. He wasn't the superstitious type. Didn't believe in ghosts or aliens. If it wasn't something you could punch or swear at, it didn't concern him. But he told me this one story, only once, when I was around 11. It was retold to me by others, but he told me once, and I still think about it to this day. He was stationed somewhere in the North Sea. I don't remember the exact coordinates, but it was cold, bleak, and deep into the winter. Said that they were on patrol during a bad stretch of weather. Not a hurricane, but close enough. Gray skies, heavy winds, waves that made the deck feel like a seesaw from hell. He and a few of the guys were on deck duty that night, all of them roped in because of how violent the water was. Everyone soaked to the bone, goggles nearly useless with all the salt and spray. Visibility was awful. And most of the guys were just trying to get through the shift without puking or freezing. And that's when he saw them. He said it like this. We were riding a swell. The ship tilted up, and I swear on my mother's grave, we saw longships, Viking longships, a dozen of them, wooden, blackened by the rain, carvings on the front, snakes and dragons or the like, just rising out of the water, oars cutting through the sea in unison. He said they weren't lit. No lights, no motors, no sound but the storm, just perfect silhouettes moving through the rain and darkness, steady, like they weren't even affected by the storm, like they belonged there. One of the guys next to him saw it too and yelled, "What the hell is that?" But by the time the others turned, the wave dropped and they lost sight of everything. Just black ocean again. He told the others, told the higher-ups too, and he got mocked for it. Guys joked about him needing glasses, about drinking too much, about ghosts of angry Norsemen coming to collect unpaid debts. You name it. But he never backed down. Not once. He didn't even tell the story that often, only a few times from what I'm told, and almost always after someone else brought it up. But every time he did, his eyes went distant. He'd lean forward a little, lower his voice and say, "They were real. I wasn't hallucinating. I didn't hit my head. I saw them." I believed him. It wasn't just that he was family. He didn't really do ghost stories. I'd heard plenty of his sea tales about engines dying in the middle of nowhere, about lightning striking so close it fried a guy's radio pack. But this was the only one that ever felt different, like it haunted him, just a little. Years later, I asked him about it again. He was probably in his late 70s by then, mostly retired from storytelling. I was in college, studying Norse mythology of all things, and I wanted to hear it from him directly one more time. He chuckled when I brought it up and said, "Still thinking about those boats, huh?" And then he paused and looked out the window for a long time. There was no joke or punchline. He just said, "There are things out on the water older than you and me, older than steam or steel. Maybe they don't show themselves unless they want to. Maybe they never left." That was the last time we talked about it. He never did retell the story, but he passed away 2 years later. I still think about that night, what he saw, how sure he was. I choose to believe him, not because it's fun, but because he never asked anyone else to. I graduated from high school in 2001, and my best friend at the time happened to be stupid rich. For her graduation present, her dad wanted to take us on a 2-month-long deep-sea voyage. They called the boat a yacht. I'm not sure if it really was a yacht or just a big-ass fancy boat. Don was the only rich friend I ever had, and I'm quite poor. I just know that this was smaller than the insanely huge yachts I see on TV. Still, it was big enough for us, her dad, a cook, a butler, and a few sailors to live on comfortably. So yeah, I mean, that's probably a yacht. Anyway, we set sail out of Fort Lauderdale. We were supposed to visit the Bahamas and all those little island places, but Dawn decided that she wanted to see Morocco for some impulsive reason I can't remember. Her dad was one of those guys that thought buying a boat magically made you an expert sailor, but he was a terrible captain. On several occasions, we heard him arguing with the crew, you know, the guys who actually did this stuff for a living, about going off course, but no, he knew better. So there we were, almost 3 weeks through our trip, somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, and a terrible storm hits. If you've never experienced a storm at sea, consider yourself lucky. It's absolutely miserable. Dawn and I stayed in our cabin, but we couldn't help but look out the little windows. I got sick multiple times, while she cried about being too pretty to die. The butler stayed with us, but he didn't know what he was doing any more than Dawn's dad. He was just there to clean up after us. At one point, we hit a wave so high that the boat went almost a full 90 degrees, and I thought that was going to be game over. When we went horizontal again, it sounded like the boat was breaking apart. I'm surprised it didn't. I truly can't describe how awful it was. It felt like it would never end, but it finally did, and we were mostly in one piece. There was some damage to the deck itself, and a large section of the railing had been crushed. Parts were torn away completely, while other parts were just flattened and mangled. Dawn and I were told to stay away from that area until we could find a port. Needless to say, we weren't going to Morocco anymore. It would take the rest of our trip just to get the repairs done and make it home on time. I had no problem staying off the damaged part of the deck. I didn't even want to leave our cabin at that point. I'd had quite enough of the sea. Dawn, however, was still living her spoiled rich girl fantasy of invincibility. Despite how she screamed when we were actively in danger. She decided that she needed pictures of all the damage to show our friends back home. She said no one would believe how bad the storm had been if we didn't have photographic evidence, and heaven forbid she miss out on any of the attention it would bring her. You're probably starting to understand why we aren't friends anymore. But hold on, it gets worse. So Dawn drags me onto the deck and starts posing next to the missing section of the railing. I had to take the pictures, of course. We were using one of those cheap disposable cameras because her dad didn't trust her with the good camera. Smart man on that front. After we snapped a few pictures, Dawn looked down into the water and started freaking out, yelling for me to give her the camera. I did, and looked over to see a massive, dark shadow rising to the surface. I really thought that it was a whale. We both did. Nothing else could be that huge, right? Dawn laid flat on the deck and leaned over the edge, snapping away as it got closer to the surface. Then the butler saw us, and I feel bad that I can't remember that man's name. He ran over, yelling for us to back up. I did, just out of reflex, but Dawn was totally engrossed in getting her pictures. The butler grabbed her just as the shadow broke the surface. He pulled her backwards just as the waves violently rocked the boat and sent the poor man and our camera flying into the water. Dawn and I both screamed and rushed to the edge in time to see not a whale, but a shark. A massive shark. It wasn't a great white. Those are big, but not whale size. And they sure can't swallow a man whole. But that's exactly what happened here. I know they're supposed to be extinct, but I swear to God, we watched a megalodon shark surge through the water and swallow the butler whole. Each of its teeth were bigger than our heads. The butler was there 1 second and gone the next with the shark. As it dove back underwater, its tail hit the boat and almost sent me and Dawn into the water too. The only thing that saved us were the sailor guys. They grabbed us and threw us away from the edge, hard. I'm not complaining. I'm extremely grateful, don't get me wrong. Dawn's dad appeared right after, and all of the sailors started talking to each other in Spanish. I have no idea what they were saying, but it looked like they were arguing. Dawn's dad was furious. He sent us back to the cabin, where we were made to wait there for hours. When he came down to talk to us, he didn't want to hear about the megalodon. He told us that the butler lost his balance and fell into the water, that it was a tragic accident, and despite the crew's best efforts, he was lost at sea. His family was later given a large settlement to leave it at that, and we went along with the story. We didn't have any proof to say otherwise, so why bother? When we finally made it back to a dock, the boat was sold as is, and Dawn's dad got us plane tickets home. I haven't gone back to the ocean since then. On the rare occasions I can afford a vacation, I prefer to stay landbound. In 2007, I spent a semester aboard the Nereus, a privately funded deep-sea research submarine designed to test new sonar mapping equipment and long-term humid submersion protocols. It was supposed to be the next big leap into ocean exploration, pressurized for extreme depths, outfitted with luxury bunking, and by a small team of hand-picked specialists. I was 23 and brought on as a communications intern, which really meant that I took notes and fetched coffee for the engineers. The plan was to spend 10 days submerged in the Puerto Rico Trench, mapping previously unexplored terrain. We descended slowly, testing equipment at intervals. The further we went, the quieter things got, until we passed 25,000 feet. That's when we noticed the sound. At first, it was a low-frequency hum, too deep to register on most of our instruments, but it made my molars buzz. We joked about it, said maybe the earth was snoring, but it didn't stop. The deeper we went, the stronger it got. Some of the others started getting headaches. One of the sonar techs had a nosebleed. We should have turned around. Instead, over the next few days, we pushed deeper. By the 5th day, we hit the trench floor. A desolate, ink-black world filled with silt and shadow. We were beyond the reach of light. Even artificial lighting seemed to get swallowed by the darkness. And that's when the real weirdness started down there. Our equipment began picking up anomalies. Strange sonar returns shaped like spires, rising hundreds of feet from the ocean floor. But nothing was visible through the viewing ports, just blackness. And those vibrating noises that now came in pulses. It was like sonar in reverse. Not something we were sending out, but something that was scanning us. Captain Dupree tried brushing it off as geological activity, said gas pockets and crust shifts could explain the pulses. But by then, people were unraveling. One of the engineers started crying, refused to leave her bunk. Another guy kept whispering that he saw movement in the shadows outside the port glass. Huge shapes that didn't make noise, but left trails in the silt. On the 7th day, one of the external camera feeds started showing interference. At first, just static. Then flashes of something massive passing overhead. No one could agree on what it was. A fin, a spine, a set of glowing ridges. We slowed all operations. Everyone was on edge. That night, though night didn't really seem to mean much down there, I woke up to someone screaming. It was the comms officer, pounding on the sealed airlock hatch, begging to be let out. He kept saying that he heard someone calling his name from the ocean. He swore his mother was outside, just past the glass, telling him to open the hatch. They sedated him. The next morning, he was gone. No alarms, no breach, no alerts from the internal sensors. Just gone. As if he walked through the steel and left nothing behind, except for his uniform, which was folded on his bunk. We searched the whole vessel, and we found no one. Captain Dupree tried to contact Surface Command. Our signal couldn't get through. We were too deep, he said, and the solar flare activity might be affecting the satellite link. It felt like bullshit. And then we started hearing voices over the intercom, static-laced, garbled, but unmistakably human. The problem was, we weren't transmitting anything. Every voice that came through said the same phrase, "Not alone." It happened once every few hours. Always the same line, always the same voice. None of us recognized it. On day 9, we began ascending. Slowly. Too slowly. Our ballast tanks weren't responding properly, and propulsion was limited. Something felt like it was holding us there. The pulses intensified, and so did the hallucinations. I woke up to find Dupree sitting in the control room with the floodlights pointed straight out into the void. He said if we just looked long enough, we'd understand. That's when I saw them. Hundreds of tiny reflections, like eyes, blinking in the dark. We reached 12,000 feet before we lost power. Completely. No lights, no engines. Just the emergency battery keeping life support running and emergency lights flickering. The walls of the sub started to creak. Something heavy was pushing against us from the outside. It didn't make sense. We were pressurized for depths even beyond this, but I swear the hole began to flex, like it was breathing, expanding and contracting in rhythm with the pulses. We drifted there for what felt like a full day. No one spoke. Most of us didn't sleep. I sat in the galley, holding a wrench I didn't know how to use in case something got in. Then, suddenly, power. Full system, lights back, motors engaged, cameras reset. But half the crew was gone. Vanished. No signs of damage, no breaches. Just bunks with impressions in the sheets. The sonar was clear. Nothing nearby. Just a clean, flat trench and miles of empty water. Panic ensued with the remainder of us. And when we lost the power again, I wasn't sure I was going to make it. I thought, that's the end. I'm gonna just disappear, vanish. But when the power returned, moments later, everyone was back. The crew entirely intact. And those of us that had remained asked the missing where they'd gone. They had no idea what we were talking about. To them, they'd been there the entire time. We surfaced 16 hours later. Coast Guard met us, took statements, ran tests. We weren't allowed to speak to each other after that. They split us up, NDA'd the hell out of everyone. The official story is that we experienced carbon dioxide exposure and had severe shared hallucinations. That the missing crew had never indeed been lost, but were due to internal psychotic episodes, and they had staged their own exits, somehow, deep underwater, without triggering an alarm. And then returned, also without triggering an alarm. Honestly, I don't know what the hell happened down there, so I was technically happy to sign an NDA. I never wanted to really talk about it again. I guess not until now. Seems kind of far-fetched to even ask if anyone's had an experience like this, but I am curious. What have you experienced 10,000 feet and below? This is my Uncle Matt's story, and I for sure wouldn't have believed it if he didn't show me a scar on the back of his shoulder. It's covered by a big, cringy tribal tattoo with a Bible quote. It's barely visible, but I could see it when he pointed to it, moving his finger along an almost perfect circle of raised skin. Don't know why I shouldn't believe him, other than how extreme the story turned. I asked my dad the validity of his story. He's Matt's younger brother. He chuckled and said, "Oh yeah, looked him up for a while, that's for sure." So, story goes as follows. Matt got a job as a hydrographic surveyor right out of college. I don't really know the ins and outs of what a hydrographic surveyor does, besides basically using machinery on boats to map the seafloor. Depth, features, science stuff. Matt currently works at Amazon, pissing in jugs to meet delivery standards. I would have never guessed that he was a marine researcher in his past. He just never exactly came off as a scholar, not these days. Picture John Cleese, but homeless. Shaggy brown hair, gray beard. Throw on some glasses thicker than a bottle cap, and you've got my Uncle Matt. He was chosen to work with another scientist named Jason. Their job was to take a small boat with a bunch of machinery out into the English Channel, off the coast of London, where they would do their surveying work. Before they left port, the boat that they were supposed to use was having problems. Jason was acting as captain and lead of their expedition, and with his basic boating mechanics knowledge, he was able to get the motor running again and insisted that they set sail. Predictably, a malfunction would kill the power their first couple kilometers out to sea. While Jason tinkered with the engine below, Matt stays above on deck, leaned over the railing and watching the waves hit the side of the boat. 30 meters out, something floats to the surface that catches his eye, resembling a mound of rubbish or waste. The sun reflected off a big, glossy, black trash bag that laid over the rest of the stuff. Sadly, seeing trash in the ocean isn't a rare thing. Fishing nets mixed with other trash and sea life, it gets tangled all together until there's a buoy of discarded material and dead ocean creatures drifting in the waves. Although an unpleasant sight, it wasn't cause for alarm, according to Matt. It wasn't until he said that he saw a person under the tarp, and it looked like they were fighting the waves, trying to make it over to the boat. That's when he was alarmed. Doing a 360-degree scan, Matt couldn't figure out where this person came from. They were the only boat out there. He calls down to Jason, telling him what he sees, and soon they're both standing on the deck, watching this mass of trash slowly make its way to the boat. They debate if they should throw a flotation device as they stare at it, trying to get enough visual evidence that it's actually a human moving under there. The closer it gets, the figure struggling under the garbage bag begins to look undeniably like a human. As the waves bob the trash pile around, in between the mess, they see the upper body of a man, from his torso level up. Brief glimpses of flesh-tone arms frantically waving every time the black plastic bag moved in the water. It's clearly a human. He was struggling, and as strange as his appearance was, Jason and Matt both leapt into action. A floating ring was thrown from the boat. It was an accurate toss, landing meters from the man, but he didn't swim for it. As much as both of them screamed for the guy to go to the red and white ring, the black mass stayed on track toward the boat. The closer it got, the more unnatural the man began to look. Jason mentioned that the man keeps swinging his arms around like he's treading water. Matt waited for another wave to move the trash around and reveal the man again. When one was large enough to separate the other, Matt agreed with Jason's observation. For the distance he was covering while fighting against the current, it didn't look like he was swimming. He was in a constant state of drowning, emerging from the water, grasping out for anything to hold on to. Questions were traded amongst the two if they could see the man's facial features, young, old. Neither of them got a decent look at the man's face. A foreboding feeling spread between Matt and Jason as the drowning man neared his distance to the boat. They would keep shouting at the man until the giant plastic bag was rubbing against the side of the boat. It's close enough to the boat where they can't just look out from where they are and see it. One of them would actually have to walk to the edge of the boat and lean their body over the railing a bit in order to see straight down to the side of the boat. Jason, the appointed captain, without words, decided that he'd be the one to do it. So as Matt stayed on the middle of the deck, Jason walked to the side of the boat, and after taking a slow, deep breath, he put his hands on the railing and leaned over. The glossy, black trash bag that encompassed the floating blob looked more rubbery and thick than plastic. Parts of it were covered in barnacles. There was a visible nest of garbage, but a lot of what he saw wasn't definable. This is all stuff he was telling Matt as he looked over the side. The center of the mass was still rising and falling, like someone was stuck beneath it. Still thinking it was a man under there, Jason tells Matt to open the rear gate at the deck because he's going to drag it on board. Using a long, skinny metal rod, Jason pushed the blob to the rear of the boat and tells Matt to help pull the thing up. For its size, it's a relatively easy process for both of them to lift it out of the water and begin dragging this man on board. 2 arms reached out from under the muck, but they were thin, deformed. Jason keeps stepping backwards, trying to get it out of the water, as Matt stops and sees that whatever they're pulling onto the deck is still coming out of the water. It no longer looked like garbage coming out of the water. As Matt's trying to figure out what he's looking at, he hears Jason scream. He turns around, and the blob that they were pulling up has opened up. The flesh-toned person that they thought was trapped inside was in reality a group of tube-like tentacles that intricately twisted themselves to resemble a human figure. When untangled, there were over a dozen tentacles whipping around the boat as the creature began to pull itself on board. With half of its body still under the surface, Matt didn't know any marine animal that had those kinds of tentacles. They didn't have suction cups. They looked like hollow tubes, almost like big rubber garden hoses, but massive, and with rows of small, pointy teeth inside, each acting independently of each other. Seeing the chaos, Matt starts slamming the gate on the creature, but that only turned a few of the tube's attention away from Jason and onto him. They lunged towards him. He could feel the razor-sharp teeth embed themselves into his shoulder, and the creature began to drain his blood like a leech. Its slippery body nearly impossible to get a proper grip on, but with both hands, Matt is able to rip it off, leaving a circular hole in his shoulder where it latched onto him. He's still fighting with it when 2 more attach themselves to his hip and left thigh, striking with the same violent precision as the one that he'd already been wrestling with. It was overpowering, and the loss of blood would quickly weaken him until all he could do was lay there while the tentacles fed on him. Drifting in and out of consciousness, Matt could feel his body slowly being dragged toward the edge of the boat by one that was burrowed into his spine. Then, only by the grace of God, he hears a metallic grinding sound as the boat's motor comes back to life with a shake from under him, and the propellers started to spin in stuttered jolts. Its blades were chopping into what he had to believe was part of the creature, still submerged, because the tubes that were stuck into his body released, and Matt was momentarily smothered as he felt the weight of the other tentacles sliding over him, retreating into the ocean. The men were once again alone on the deck, and after a while, Matt gathered enough energy to pick himself up. Woozy from the loss of blood, he stumbles around the boat until he finds Jason slouched over the helm. His back was covered in bloody holes from the attack, but miraculously, he was still alive. Matt had to use all of his strength to move Jason's body over so that he could take the wheel. He recalls it as some of the worst stagnations of pain he's ever experienced while steering the boat back to land. The open wounds on his body stung like the creature injected toxins into him. And they also burrowed into muscles, severing tendons and making Matt scream out in pain when he has to steady the wheel against the waves. As the boat got into port, he used the radio, got in contact with someone who called an ambulance, and they were waiting when they arrived. The sedatives they gave Matt weren't effective, and he was awake the whole trip to the hospital. Doctors looked at him like he was mental when he had told them what happened. A male nurse overheard the story, suggested that it was a group of big eels or even prehistoric leeches. The nurse's comment may have been delivered in a facetious tone, but Matt argued vigorously, repeating that the tubes were too thin and were all coming from a single source that stayed hidden under the boat. He told them that they all started by presenting themselves in the shape of a human, all the tubes twisted to form a head, arms, down to its belt line. It was intentionally moving the way that it did. The doctor started writing on her clipboard. She didn't find it as humorous as the nurse did. But Matt knew right then and there that this hospital stay would probably be spent at the other kind of hospital. And he was right. But it was most likely in his best interest. Even after his lengthy stay there, my dad said that Matt became even more of a recluse than he already was. And I know it doesn't help that Jason would end up dying in the hospital a few days later, leaving Matt without anyone to validate his story. After I heard it and my dad confirmed it, he added, "Yeah, your Uncle Matt is a man who's lost his marbles, and it was a steep decline to where he is now. But he didn't always used to be like that." So I'm more inclined to believe what he's saying is true. I wanted to come on here, tell his story, and see if anyone with a Marine background wanted to lend their ideas as to what this creature could have been. It may not uncrazy my uncle, but it might bring him a sense of closure. I don't know. You tell me. I'm afraid that it could also catapult him into some sort of frozen PTSD deadpan. He kept doing that in between his story, stopping all of a sudden with a 1,000-yard stare for a moment before starting again. Kind of freaked me out. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me, whether it's your first time or you're a regular. Your support means the world over here. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night, and keep those eyes open long enough for those deep sleep videos. And of course, subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Special thanks to the Darkest Hour channel members, Lori TESDAHL, Sarah Marie, Robert Bailey, COLTDADDY Eagle, MALLORY DOMINGUEZ, KARI Watkins, PILAR TREDEN WIXSON, Larry Hill, RIPLEY, JOJO STARCHER, Mary Patrick, Debbie LAFRENIERE, Julie Bourdelais, Jennifer BECK, MARINA LACHNER, Make Hamilton Home, Evan Pratt, Mary Hineline, Katharine Yes.ImtherealKatie Isabelle, Landshark, Danielle Hecht, Veronica Mckiernan, Keziah Pietersen, Amber Baker, Khris Lauzon, Kara Gios, Marvin Allen, Forgotten Ruins TV, Raven Wolf, Carlos, Stacia Gillette, Nate Black, Jill Harper, Kathy Valkenbush, and Cosmic Chick. Also, a big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons: Tracy S., Mary H., Tanya F., Tamra K., Monica L., Zoe Watt, Shelley B., Donald C., Marion T., Rat Girl, Alicia S., Aaron G., Nikki H., Mr. Revenant, Naz K., Brendan G., Paul T., Nicholas C., Tony P., Lizanne, Arlene F., Adrian, T.F. Parham, Jason G., Lori T., and Bobo Jenkins. If you want to support the channel in other ways, consider joining our Patreon or becoming a channel member. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour or click the link in the description. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, Amanda, darkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.